Hello and welcome back to Chillers and Thrillers, the paranormal podcast where I read true stories of people's encounters with the strange and unexplained. No comedy, skepticism, or gore, only 100% true spooky tales. In today's episode, we're going to take a long drive and listen in to stories of people who encountered paranormal entities while driving through different roads and highways. As always, I would love to hear your thoughts or experiences, so feel free to drop me a line at chillersandthrillers@gmail.com or simply post a message on the Chillers and Thrillers YouTube channel. I'd love to get to 1,000 subscribers on the channel by the end of the year, so if you do have a YouTube account, I would really appreciate it if you give me a follow there as well. Before we get started, I wanted to thank listener Ziggy, who reached out to me with her experience, and for allowing me to share it on the podcast. This experience also inspired me for this episode's theme, so thank you very much, Ziggy. Also, many thanks to listeners Chica06021 and Fraz Raja for their very kind reviews. Now, get comfortable, turn down the lights, and buckle in. Lonely Highway Ghost, submitted by Ziggy. My parents still live in my childhood home, which is located in the middle of a national forest. It's a beautiful area with rivers, springs, caves, and so many historical sites. It's also very isolated. The nearest Walmart is 45 minutes away, but when I was a kid, it was an hour and a half away. About 13 years ago, I lived in a small city about 2 hours away, but I visited my parents pretty often. The drive was fine, except for the last 45 minutes that went through the forest. This stretch of road was empty of houses or people. It was also very winding, with sharp drop-offs on one side of the road. In 2011, the cell signal was very spotty. I worked a 3 p.m. to 12 a.m. shift at work, and I am a natural night owl, so I usually drove over after work on Friday nights. It was on such a drive in January that this story happened. It was about 18 degrees Fahrenheit with a wind chill of about 10 degrees, but clear. About 20 minutes into this isolated and winding stretch of highway, I approached one of the sharpest curves with a significant drop on one side. My headlights illuminated a man on the side of the road. He was heavy-set and dressed in khaki shorts and a dark t-shirt. I was immediately concerned because I couldn't see a car. He was waving his arms as though to flag me down, not sticking out his thumb like a hitchhiker. I assumed he had gone around the curve too fast, lost control, and his car was somewhere at the bottom of the drop-off. There was no cell signal, and I knew that, 1, I wouldn't be very useful on my own if he or someone else was hurt, 2, there was no place to pull over safely, and 3, I was a young woman on my own. Knowing this, I kept driving, because I knew that about a mile or two down the highway there was an old access road for a defunct fire tower, where I would have enough cell signal to make a call. I pulled over there, called Highway Patrol, and reported the man, then continued on my way. I reached my parents' house, let myself in, and went to bed. This is where it gets weird. As I said, the area is incredibly isolated. The nearest highway patrol station is hours away. Most of the time, the local volunteer first responders and or U.S. Forest Service rangers reach the accidents first. My mother worked for the National Park Service and knew everyone. 2 family friends, we'll call them Bob and Mary, are both neighbors and volunteer first responders. 2 others, we'll call them Matt and Betty, are law enforcement for the U.S. Forest Service. All 4 ended up as part of the search for the man I saw. After all, he was poorly dressed and below freezing temperatures. As part of the report, they got my name and of course knew who I was. Bob and Mary stopped by for breakfast at my parents' house and told me what they, Matt and Betty, and a few others experienced during the search. The volunteers and law enforcement drove up and down that stretch of highway several times. A few of them saw the man, But every time they managed to pull off the road and walk to the spot they saw him, he was gone. Several volunteers climbed down the embankment to search for a car, but found nothing. They searched for hours, from about 1:30 in the morning until dawn, until the highway patrol took over. Bob and Mary were pretty weirded out, but made the logical conclusion that he must have gotten picked up by a civilian at some point during the search. Fast forward a few weeks. Bob and Mary told me another report came in of a man trying to flag down a car in the area around the same time at night. They didn't even look along the road. They went straight to the spot where they had seen the man weeks before. Someone, I don't know who, went down the embankment immediately, and this time they found a vehicle. It had obviously lost control and rolled down the embankment. The man, heavy set and wearing khaki shorts and a dark t-shirt, had clearly died in the accident. But the child in the back seat was alive, though injured. The kid got evacuated via helicopter to the nearest major hospital and, to my knowledge, survived. I believe ghosts and spirits exist outside of time, and that is what I saw. I saw the ghost of that man trying to flag down a car to save his child, but I saw him too early. My report prepared those who were needed. Whether intentionally or just by some instinct that pinged due to my story, they went immediately down the embankment and saved that child, who otherwise would have certainly died from injuries and exposure. The Foggy Drive, submitted by user funnygifcollector. A couple of years ago, I was taking some classes at an extension of a local college. The campus was spread out and had buildings in the town 35 miles from home. One class got out late and usually left me getting home around midnight. This particular night, I stopped by Walmart to pick up some groceries because midnight shopping is the best since there's no crowd. It was late July and the weather was extremely cold. The inversion was bad and the fog that settled in was unusually thick. There were patches of clarity that showed that there was no moon that night. I had driven the road a million times, and even with the fog, could identify my location easily. As I came around a corner, the road came up a big hill, then gradually headed south. The road was wide, but was surrounded by a shallow canyon. As I was leaving the canyon, I came into a patch of fog that was so dense that I had to slam on the brakes because I could not see more than 10 feet in front of me. The fog caught all the stray light in the area and immediately illuminated everything with a bright orange glow. Suddenly, I see something dart in front of my car. It was on hands and knees, but looked like it belonged on its hind legs. Its forelegs were short and covered with dense fur, and its hind legs were too long for it to be something that usually stood on 4 feet. Its hind legs were also covered in dense fur, but it had loose, flowing skin. My first thought was that I almost missed hitting a little boy that was playing in the road, except the boy was covered in fur. I stopped the car and watched as the creature ran across the road, loping along with very childlike movements. My heart was pounding, and I waited to see what it would do next. It padded off the side of the road, climbed up the embankment on the other side. Once atop, it turned and looked at me. It had a cat-like face, but once again looks like a boy in costume or pajamas. It was clearly an animal, but it was so human-like it scared me for weeks after. I looked up images on Google and came to the conclusion it was a juvenile bobcat with some extremely disproportionate legs. But something about it still unsettled me. A few weeks passed and I had forgotten most of it. Driving the same road in similar circumstances, I came across the same patch of fog. It was so thick, it was like someone had dropped a blanket over my car. I slowed to a crawl and looked for the road sign that signaled that I was halfway home. As I drove past it, I noticed a man leaning up against it. He was wearing a gas mask from World War II. He looked directly at me and shook his head disapprovingly. I freaked out and picked up speed. I wanted nothing to do with whatever was out there. Outside of the fog, the night was crystal clear and the moon was full, providing excellent visibility. As I made my way out of it, a few hundred yards later, there was a deafening crack. I instinctively slumped in my seat and thought I had been shot at. But there had been no other cars, no buildings, and no other people around for at least 15 miles. A quick scan of my windows showed no cracks or holes. Panicking because I knew I was so alone, I sped up the car. A second or two later, there was another deafening crack, then a third, then a fourth. Suddenly, my windshield was cracked with lines through every portion of it except the driver's side. The windshield was only a few months old and had no chips, bubbles, cracks, or flaws before that night. The next morning, I looked at my windshield and there was obvious impact marks in 4 to 5 places, but it was impossible to know what they came from. After the inversion cleared that winter, I never had another unusual experience on that road, but it still creeps me out to drive it at night in the winter. Sonora Dessert, submitted by user javiers. Okay, this is so cliche that it could have been taken from a horror B movie, but it's true. I experienced this on a road near the Sonora Desert in Baja California. The night was thick, and we were two, me being the passenger. The driver was a 42-year-old Ukrainian-born dude with no gods except his wife. We had stopped because there was a dog coyote in the middle of the road. The closer we approached, slowing down and honking, expecting the dog coyote to run off, the bigger it looked. We halted as the thing was not moving at all. It was not facing us, it just looked like it was sleeping. Then it suddenly turned his head and looked at us. Mind you, there were no more than 10 to 15 meters between us and it. Its face was not a dog face. It looked like a breed of a Neanderthal and a dog, if that makes sense. It stared at us and suddenly stood up on 2 legs. It looked like a werewolf, as those portrayed at the movies, and was no less than 2 meters tall. The driver I was with did the most sudden and fastest U-turn I have ever seen and bolted us away from there. The thing did chase us for some time and obviously didn't succeed, but it was fast. The whole time we were screaming curses, many versions of it. We continued speeding until the next gas station where we refilled the tank, fully speechless. After about an hour, we began speaking, and we both agreed that we both saw the same thing. I had nightmares for months, not just for that encounter. My guess was, and still is, that if things like the one I saw that night were real, maybe there are other things I have always considered legends and fairy tales that could also be real. And that amazes and scares the life out of me. You Need to Stop, submitted by user anothermassacre. One night, I was giving my dad a lift to my brother's place. I was driving down a rural 2-lane road, and it was dark. The lights on my car were very dim since it was an old car. Everything was going smoothly. I was doing about 65 to 70 miles per hour, and I saw a twig hanging down, and the shadow of it split the driver's side headlights of the oncoming vehicle. I was driving under a huge canopy of very mature oak trees that encompassed both sides of the roads in this bit of stretch. So this wasn't unusual. As I'm driving, I hear a voice say, "You need to stop." I thought, whoa, no, I must just be tired. but the voice sounded like my voice, and it was super calm but firm. Then I heard it say, "If you don't stop now, it'll be too late." It sounded calm, casual, and meaningful. I took a deep breath, simultaneously slamming hard on the brakes as quickly as possible. My dad began cussing me up and down, calling me crazy as he braced his hands on the dashboard. Once the car was completely stopped, I got out of the car. I started having a panic attack and I couldn't breathe, and my dad was still yelling at me. And then he asked me if I had seen that. I followed his gaze and saw a black cow standing horizontally, maybe an inch from my front bumper. If I hadn't stopped when I did, I don't even want to think about what could have happened. The Boy, submitted by user ForeverPizzaPrincess. This story happened to my dad. My dad was around 20 at the time, driving along with Ray, his best friend. It's around 3 o'clock in the morning, and not a soul is awake, when all of a sudden, a red ball pops out onto the road, along with the little 6 to 7-year-old boy. There's absolutely no time to stop. My father and Ray don't even have long enough to brace for impact when the car plows into the kid and then goes right through him. When my dad looked in the rearview mirror, the little boy is standing there, looking back at them from the road, smiling. Ray turns and sees the boy as well, asking my father if he saw that too, which he obviously says yes. It turns out in a neighboring town of where I used to live in New Jersey, there was a tale that outside of a school, a ghost boy would run across the road in front of your car, chasing a red ball. This came about because of a little boy unfortunately dying from chasing his bouncing toy into the street during recess. My father knew this story but doesn't believe in the paranormal. This was his very first experience with anything ghostly. The Car, submitted by user markofshame. Driving home on a storm day, I see that a side road up to the local golf course is blocked off by flashing barricades. I also spy a Mercedes parked past the barricades with its hazards on. I stop and walk up to the car to see if they need help since I'm a trained EMT. I shine my light in the back seat to see a man slumped over, apparently asleep. Thinking I've got a few drunks, I move up to the driver window and rap on the glass and shine my light in. The driver is sitting bolt upright, unmoving, staring straight ahead. My window wrapping or light doesn't cause him to blink, flinch, or move. I look over and the passenger is slumped forward onto the dash. This begins to creep me out. I call down to the sheriff's station and request a code 2, which means no lights or sirens, unit to come to my location to help me check them out, since the doors are locked. While on the phone, I walk to my truck to get my go bag. As I'm on the phone with dispatch, she asks me to get a license number for the car. And at the same time, a cherry picker truck comes rumbling down from up the closed road. I move to go around the truck to get the plate number, and the car is gone. I talked to the driver of the truck, and he said there was an 80-foot tree down across the road, and that he didn't think it'd be open for a day or so. So the question is, where the heck did the car go? There was a tree blocking the road one way, barricades down the other. It kept me a bit unsettled when stopping at accidents and hazards since then. The Waiting Figure, submitted by user OdinsValkyrie. So, first, let me start by saying that I've done a decent bit of driving. Not as a professional or anything like that, but it's always been very meditative for me, so I've always had plenty of drives with no destination in mind. Point is, I'm no stranger to night driving. So a couple years ago, we moved to a popular tourist destination along the coast of the US. There's only one major highway in, so there are a lot of accidents. In fact, I had just gotten T-boned a month prior to this and rear-ended less than a week after getting my car back. That many accidents. Too many out-of-state drivers with zero police presence, but I digress. As it is, I also have to take the same highway to and from work every day. So I've been witness to quite a few wrecks. If I see them happen, I always stop and make sure everyone is okay, that they have working phones, etc. I should also mention that long stretches of this road are nothing but swampy forest for miles at a time. So, like any other day, I'm driving home from work and get to one of these isolated sections. I see up ahead a silver car, and as I'm getting close, the passenger's door opens, someone gets out and starts waving their arms. As I slow down, it looks like the front end has bad damage, and I figure it's another hit and run, so I pull off to the side and throw it in park. Once I get out and make my way to the car, though, it's deserted. Not a single living soul around, save for the cars flying by. And the driver's window is all busted out. It had rained the night before, and this car had obviously been there during the storm because it was soaked and had a little grass and leaves on the seat. I do a quick scan of the tree line to make sure they hadn't tumbled down the bank or something, but nobody. Nothing. I even called out once and got no response. There is no orange sticker on it indicating the police had flagged it being abandoned, and when I drove by the next morning, it wasn't there. I have no idea what happened, but I know what I saw, and the passenger door definitely opened, and someone definitely got out of that car. The whole thing was so weird. I seriously felt like I was losing it for a second because it was just so clear and vivid. I saw the guy's face, not just something out of the corner of my eye. The best paranormal explanation I've been able to come up with is that it was some sort of imprint or residual haunting. I do believe traumatic events can leave a mark, and a car accident is pretty traumatic. The Stick Man. Submitted by user Existential Ninja 40. I'm from St. Cloud, and I have had more than a few experiences growing up. I now live in the Twin Cities, but my pops still lives in St. Joseph, which is a few miles out of St. Cloud and very rural. I saw a stick man when driving out to swim at Middle Skunk Lake in Avon, about 10 miles from St. Cloud's. My family and I would go out there multiple times a week during the summer to go swimming at the beach. One night, we were driving back on the back roads through the country, right by St. John's University, which has a whole bunch of creepy history to it. There were only random farms situated among the rolling fields and woods in the area. There's a long stretch where there was cornfields on both sides of the road, but the right side was a small area of corn that ran directly up to the woods, probably about 100 to 150 yards from the road. I remember always having a nervous, anxious feeling when driving this stretch due to the woods, not to mention that this area just had a strange vibe to it. One night, while driving back, I had my head rested against the window in the back of the minivan and happened to see movement at the edge of the cornfield and woods to my right. I broke from my daze and looked closer, and up ahead, at the tree-lined cornfield border, was a man, standing next to the tree, almost like a statue. I still remember the absolute terror I felt when I saw this, and we were going to be parallel with him in a matter of seconds. I remember that I wondered how I could see him since the corn was rather high, and I could see almost from his waist up. He was so tall and skinny and looked almost like he was composed of sticks. I also remember he had a red-colored flannel shirt that was tattered up and torn up, and what looked like a hood. But the scariest thing was that I saw him moving for a second, and then he froze, as if he knew I was seeing him, and he just stood there staring straight ahead. When we were almost parallel to him, I heard a voice in my head say, "Look at me." And as we became parallel to him, he had this smile on his face, and it was all distorted. But I remember how big and sinister the smile was, and how time felt like it was slowed down, or almost moving at a pace like strobe light flashing, with each scene moving on and off from darkness and light, and seeing things when it was light again. It's very hard to explain the feeling of terror I was experiencing and still can feel when recalling this. I was so scared and discombobulated that I remember wanting to scream or say something, but not being able to. It was as if everyone else in the van were almost on autopilot, because no one even saw or glanced over. Not my 3 siblings, or my mom, or my dad. They all were just looking forward in their own worlds. There's a heaviness in the van, which I don't know how to explain, but it felt like it was both static, electric feeling and thickness in the air. But it was after driving around a bend, the feeling dissipated, and suddenly, I was able to hear the radio and my siblings talking. I yelled, "Did anyone else see the man in the woods?" And my mom said, "What man in the woods?" To which I tried to explain to them what I saw, but no one believed me. To this day, I still vividly remember that night and the feeling, and I even took some friends down that road last summer when I was back there visiting my dad. I instantly started getting that same feeling I would get as a child when we turned onto the road. There's alfalfa growing then, so I could see right back to the tree line. I saw the area that I saw that man, and it made me realize how high up he must have been. So he was either standing on something, or floating, or was just really tall. Nothing happened the last time I went back, but the feeling remained the same. And I would never want to be stuck driving that road by myself, whether it was day or night, because I have no desire to see that man again. The Manitoba Drive. Submitted by user top_establishment464. Okay, so I live in Manitoba, Canada, and I have a scary one for you. My friend and I are driving from Winnipeg to Gillam. For reference, this is about a 12-hour drive north in the province, up near Churchill. After hitting Thompson, we got onto the 280. This highway has signs saying, "Bring winter gear to survive," etc. Help is hours away from any direction, and that's only if the weather allows you to walk hours to get cell reception. Picture -40 degrees Celsius and only reception in 2 spots in a 4-hour stretch. Anyways, we're driving up there in autumn, but a blizzard starts out of nowhere. No lights, no cars. We are past Split Lake by about 50 kilometers, and out of nowhere, the blizzard stops for a second. When this happens, we see a snowy owl come right towards the windshield. I slow down as fast as I can, as this has all happened in a split second and it is pitch black out there. Sun sets early in the north. Honestly, the only way I can describe it is time slowing down. The snowy owl turns into this really messed up face just as it's about to hit the windshield. Like the movie poster Slender Man face mixed with the bat coming through the windshield in Mothman Prophecies. And the blizzard starts again. We look at each other shocked and then immediately look to the dash of the car. This is a newer car, 2018, and we were listening to music that we downloaded beforehand, knowing that there was no service. On the dash and on my phone screen is the face. We started freaking out and tearing up immediately, but I knew I had to stay calm because this road is no joke. I was driving in a blizzard in the pitch black with that face on the screen, and we tried to turn my phone on and off for the next 2 hours of the drive and it wouldn't go away. Even when my phone was off, the face was still on the dash. We experienced a few more bizarre things on the way, and the feeling was horrendous, like it was taunting us or something. The fact it was there the rest of the drive and throwing random obstacles along the way. When we finally came around the lake and were almost in town, my music started playing again out of nowhere, and the face on my phone and dash were gone. It was one of the most memorable 2 hours of my life, and I can't explain it. Talking with Indigenous folks around the area, it's common for weird things to happen along that stretch of highway. And that's all for this episode. I hope you all enjoyed these terrifying tales, and as always, I would love to hear your stories or just your thoughts. If you're listening to me on your preferred podcast platform, please don't forget to leave me a review and share with your paranormally inclined friends and family. If you're listening to me on YouTube, please leave me a like and a comment. I hope all you ghouls and ghosts stay safe, and I'll see you again soon.